there's a lot of really unusual details and questions that keep popping up during today's parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And the parable never really answers them, which might make us scratch our heads about this. For example, question is, how did the rich man get so rich? Did God bless him with riches? You know, some people call the material things that they've worked hard for blessings, as if God rewarded them for being good. That's a whole other homily I'll get to someday. Also, this parable does not tell us that the rich man was evil, or that he was an inside trader, he got his money while ordinary stockholders lost theirs, or that he owned sweatshops and paid his employees less than a living wage, or that he was a slumlord. Nah. Those would be what the church teaches us are acts of commission. So what did he do to justify that final punishment of such great torment? What did he do? He didn't do anything. He did nothing. Nothing. Those are acts of omission, the greatest and most insidious of all of our misdeeds. He simply ignored that desperate man at his doorstep. How many times did he come and go from his house for business or pleasure, and all the while he ignored that miserable person at the doorstep? That's what caused the final torment. That is what put him on the other side of the great chasm separating him from Abraham and Lazarus. Here's some more questions to scratch our head over. How did Lazarus get so poor? Was he born into the 95% of desperately poor people? Was he injured while working in the fields? Was he born with some physical limitation? Was he mentally ill? Nor does the story tell us that Lazarus was particularly good or saintly, and whatever he did to earn his place by Abraham's side. This parable never tells us whether Lazarus was good or evil, or whether he was poor or noble. Lazarus is just that man at the door who is passed by and unnoticed. He is one of the invisible poor, invisible to that rich man who had more pressing matters in his life. Lazarus became part of the daily scenery that we all get used to seeing. And soon we don't even notice that anymore. It's like the people who live in tents under highway overpasses. Like the families at our borders who are fleeing desperate violence in their hometowns. And so they come north to our doorstep in order to find relief and protection. The story shows Lazarus and the rich man in the next life, and a lot has changed for them to the extreme. Lazarus is now in the comfort and security of the bosom of Abraham. The bosom of Abraham? That is very high praise for a Jewish person. And the rich man is in torment. But here's something else that's changed. In all of the parables that Jesus tells us, the ones about women who need bread, farmers who plant seeds, landowners who hire workers, Good Samaritans, prodigal sons, this is the only parable where the person is named. Unlike our world, where we know the names of the rich and famous and the poor are invisible and anonymous, in this story, it's the rich man who's anonymous. no name, and the poor man is named Lazarus. Do you know what Lazarus means? It means the one who God helps. Jesus reminds us in the story that God notices the unnoticed. God holds the unimportant as important. And God will comfort those who the world ignores in their misery. God, we are told, knows the names of the poor, and he cherishes them. Angels carried Lazarus away to the bosom of Abraham. That is quite a ceremonial ending for somebody who counted as nothing in this world. And the rich man, well, you all heard, he dies pretty much without any ceremony. The rich man also died and was buried. That's what it says. That's all that it says. So you see, this parable is like an alarm clock. It's supposed to wake us up. It is intentionally stark and tells us where God's heart really is. Riches and comforts are not proof of God's favor. And what we call the good life and blessings are not signs of God's approval. In other words, having a lot does not prove that we are in God's good graces. That alarm clock is ringing, folks. And Jesus is telling us, wake up, you still have time. Take notice. Act on what you see. The poor and the desperate are right here now at our doorstep. So that's a good place to look, to see, to respond to those in need who require our time and attention. Modern forms of communication like TV and podcasts and the internet, they have brought the poor and the desperate of the world right up close to us. They've also helped us hear this gospel as it takes flesh in the actions and the words of our own Pope Francis. And while national borders must be respected, so must also the needs of those in desperate conditions who are right at our doorstep. You know what, too? Also at our doorstep are the citizens of Ukraine. We've almost forgotten about them, haven't we? Who are still under siege every day and night by an evil regime. Jesus and his parents certainly knew these migrants and refugees and victims' experiences firsthand, because you all remember that the Holy Family were also immigrants and refugees and victims fleeing from violence and a murder plot right in their native land as they escaped the safety to Egypt. Our bishops have reminded us that to respect life is also to respect human dignity and family integrity. Our bishops have criticized the practices that separate spouses and children and infants, all vulnerable. Our bishops tell us that such actions hardly show a respect for life. That is the core teaching of our church. We may not know the names of those coming to us out of desperation, but like Lazarus, they too can be called the ones who God loves. And they're not so invisible, are they? We have seen them, haven't we? They are at our doorstep, not just in the news, but right here in our own country, in our own state, in our own community. The gospel tells us to keep an eye out for Lazarus, that person that we tend to overlook, but who is really cherished by God.